Imagine stealing $80 million from one of the most heavily fortified vaults on Earth without a single alarm ever going off. In 2005, Brazil wasn't facing an ordinary robbery. It was about to witness a crime that would later be described as the boldest heist in the country's history. 34 thieves, a meticulously engineered plan, and the vault of the Brazilian central bank itself. Surveillance cameras, thermal sensors, security systems that were supposed to be impenetrable. And yet, they got in. They executed the plan. They walked out with the money, without triggering one single alarm. So how did this happen? And how did a robbery that looked like the perfect criminal dream turn into a deadly curse, hunting down everyone involved, one by one? The investigation didn't just uncover the threads of the crime. It exposed a terrifying level of corruption that reached deep inside the police force itself. What you're about to hear is not fiction. These are real events, and the truth behind them is far darker than you can imagine. Now, let's dive into the chilling details that brought this story to life. The story begins on Monday morning, August 8, 2005. That day, Brazil's federal police received a call that made no sense at all. The central bank branch in the city of Fortaleza had been robbed. From the very first moment, the news sounded impossible. The central bank wasn't an easy target. It was a heavily fortified facility, protected by the highest levels of security, and it had never been breached before. Still, police units rushed to the scene immediately. When they arrived, bank employees told them something unexpected. The robbery hadn't happened upstairs. It had happened underground. It was Monday, right after the weekend. When employees returned to work and opened the bank, they went down to the basement, where the cash was stored. And that's where the shock hit. In the basement floor, there was a hole, not a random break, not damage from an explosion, but a narrow, carefully cut opening leading straight into a tunnel dug beneath the building. What made it even stranger was how tight the opening was. So narrow that most of the officers immediately realized there was no way an average adult could fit through it. And yet, the first question everyone asked, without hesitation, was simple. How much money was taken? At that moment, the employees didn't have an exact answer. They hadn't finished counting yet. But the initial estimate was already shocking. More than 100 million Brazilian reais. Later, after a full audit, the real number came out. 164 million Brazilian reais. That was roughly $80 million at the time. A number that's hard to even process. What made it even more unbelievable was the weight. That amount of cash weighed 3.5 tons, about the same as 3 standard cars. An entire mountain of paper money, removed without anyone noticing a thing. And the thieves hadn't chosen the cash randomly. They deliberately left behind the brand new bills, fresh from the printing presses, because their serial numbers ran in sequence and could be tracked easily. Instead, they went after older bills. Money that had already been in circulation, with irregular serial numbers, making it almost impossible to trace. Standing in front of that narrow hole, the officers were completely stuck. No one could get inside. Until one man stepped forward. He was thin enough to squeeze through the opening. Calm and focused, he said he would go in. Another officer tried to stop him, warned him of the risks. There could be traps, explosives, or even thieves still hiding inside, armed and waiting. But the officer didn't back down. His name was Enéas Sobrera. Fear was there, but the rush of adrenaline was stronger. In that moment, he made his choice. He bent down, slipped into the hole, and began crawling into the dark tunnel. The tunnel was fully reinforced with solid wooden planks. It had ventilation pipes, working fans, and even lights that were still turned on. That detail alone was enough to send a chill through his body. Lights on meant one terrifying possibility. The thieves might still be there, at the end of the tunnel, waiting, armed. In that moment, Aeneas realized he had willingly thrown himself into the unknown. Fear crawled into his nerves, but he didn't turn back. He kept moving forward, painfully slow, almost holding his breath with every inch he crawled. Each movement was cautious, overly cautious, because one invisible wire, one wrong shift of weight, could trigger a bomb or set off a trap left behind by the thieves. Believe it or not, Aeneas spent an entire hour crawling through that tunnel, even though it was only about 70 meters long. Fear turned a short distance into a long, suffocating journey of darkness and anticipation. Finally, he reached the end. There, he saw a ladder leading up. Aeneas drew his gun and began climbing slowly, ready for any possible confrontation. Every second, he expected to open the hatch and stare straight into the barrels of waiting weapons. He lifted the cover carefully, looked to the right, then to the left. No one. The place was eerily silent. Not a sound, not a single movement. But one thing caught his attention immediately. Every surface was coated with a thick layer of white powder, almost like flour. It wasn't random. It had been spread deliberately to erase fingerprints and prevent any trace from being followed. The house itself was a mess. Clothes scattered everywhere, tools thrown around, trash piled in corners, as if the place had been completely turned upside down. All the windows were sealed shut with wooden boards, cutting the inside off from the outside world. After a careful search, Aeneas confirmed it. The house was empty. No people. No sign of the stolen money. In one of the rooms, he found bags filled with sand. Clearly the same sand that had been removed while digging the tunnel. Aeneas climbed up to the roof, and that's where the biggest surprise hit him. The house wasn't far from the bank at all. It was only about 70 meters away. He immediately called his fellow officers and reported his location. That house, painted green at the time of the robbery, didn't look suspicious from the outside. It was officially registered as a company that installed artificial grass for home gardens. And from inside that completely ordinary-looking house, one of the largest robberies in the country's history had begun. The news exploded like a media bomb. Within hours, it was everywhere. Local TV channels, newspapers, then international media picked it up. Journalists flooded the area, surrounding the house in massive numbers, tracking every detail, every movement, from the very moment the police uncovered the location. Meanwhile, investigators went to work non-stop. The house was examined inch by inch. So was the bank's basement. Every part of the crime scene was analyzed, trying to understand how an operation this precise could have been pulled off. And soon, investigators noticed something disturbing. A striking similarity between this crime and another major robbery that had taken place just 1 year earlier, in São Paulo, a city notorious for professional gangs and highly sophisticated criminal operations. At that point, the conclusion became almost unavoidable. What happened here wasn't an isolated crime. It was part of a single criminal network, responsible for 2 heists that shook Brazil to its core. As mentioned earlier, the thieves rented the house very carefully, then painted it green and officially registered it as a company specializing in artificial grass. It was the perfect cover. Piles of sand and dirt around the property wouldn't raise suspicion. They would look completely normal for a business like that. Inside the house, they cut through the floor of one room and built a tight, seamless cover that looked exactly like the original flooring, like an ordinary tile or a piece of carpet. If anything unexpected happened, if someone showed up suddenly, the opening could be sealed in seconds, making the tunnel disappear completely, as if it had never existed. The tunnel itself was exactly 73 meters long, and it wasn't dug with modern machinery. They used basic hand tools, shovels, pickaxes, and bags. The goal was simple: no noise. Every bit of soil they removed was packed into bags and quietly dragged back into the house. To reinforce the tunnel, they used a combination of wooden planks and steel sheets. Investigators estimated that nearly 900 wooden boards were used along the tunnel's length. They also installed ventilation pipes, fans, and electrical wiring to power the lights. Standard practice in professional tunnel operations. But what truly set this tunnel apart was that they didn't stop there. They also ran a water line and a telephone line. The water was essential for drinking and working. The phone line allowed direct communication between the crew inside the tunnel and those inside the house. Constant coordination, step by step. According to one of the thieves who was arrested later, the work ran on shifts, about 7 men per shift, and the operation never stopped, day and night. The biggest challenge at the beginning wasn't digging the tunnel. It was getting rid of the dirt. During the first days, a truck came every single day to haul away bags of sand. But people in the small neighborhood started to notice. A truck going in and out daily, loaded with massive amounts of soil. That kind of thing doesn't go unnoticed. The thieves realized this could expose them, so they changed their plan immediately. They began storing the sand inside the house itself. Bags were stacked inside the rooms. When a room was filled from floor to ceiling, they sealed it off with boards and paper, making it look unused. Room after room ended up completely packed with sandbags. After that, they moved to the backyard. There, they began dumping the soil and leveling it carefully so the ground still looked flat. Over time, the backyard floor rose by nearly 1 full meter from the sheer volume of dirt. As for the tunnel's path, it was almost perfectly straight, with one small deviation at a specific point. They were forced to divert slightly to avoid a sewer pipe in the way. Once past that obstacle, the tunnel continued with astonishing precision until it ended directly beneath the central bank's basement. The bank's vault area was a specialized facility filled with heavy equipment. Among it was a massive crane, used daily to move the enormous cash containers stored inside the vault. These containers were no ordinary boxes. Each one weighed more than half a ton, making manual movement impossible. Vault employees relied on that crane throughout the workday to move cages and containers of money from one spot to another. And when the day ended, the crane wasn't returned to any fixed position. It was simply left wherever it had last been used. A small detail, one that would later play a dangerously critical role in how this story unfolded. What happened next wasn't a coincidence at all. It was a razor-sharp detail that revealed just how deep the planning really went. On Friday, right before employees closed the bank and left for the weekend, the crane inside the vault stopped in a highly sensitive position, exactly next to the spot where the thieves planned to open the tunnel exit. That single detail immediately set off alarm bells for investigators. The crane, sitting in the one position that blocked the view of a security camera. How could that happen by pure chance? The questions came fast and heavy. Was someone inside the bank aware of what was about to happen? Was this placement part of the plan from the very beginning? And it didn't stop there. The crane's design itself ended up helping the thieves in ways no one expected. Its metal support bars ran along the wall, and beside them sat the massive cash containers. But those containers weren't pressed directly against the wall. There was a narrow gap between the containers and the wall. That gap became a hidden corridor. It was only about 60 centimeters wide, but it was enough. Every thief who entered the vault was slim by design. They had to be. The tunnel entrance was narrow to begin with. So they moved through that corridor, completely shielded from the cameras, without alerting a single guard. Originally, the vault wasn't covered by many cameras. Only 6 cameras monitored the entire area. On paper, that sounded sufficient. In reality, it wasn't. Blind spots existed, especially in the spaces between the cash containers and the walls. That was one of the security flaws the thieves knew exactly how to exploit. To be extra safe, they placed a cart in front of the tunnel exit and leaned a wooden board against it, making sure the opening was fully concealed from every camera angle. But cameras weren't the only obstacle. Inside the vault, there was another system, far more dangerous: thermal motion sensors. These sensors were designed to trigger an alarm the moment they detected human movement. So the big question was obvious. How did the thieves move around the vault without setting them off? The answer exposed a shocking failure. The sensors had been installed incorrectly. Instead of being mounted on the side walls, where they would be effective, they were installed on the ceiling. And because the vault ceiling was relatively high, the sensor's range was limited, creating multiple blind zones across the vault. Even worse, the thieves knew all of this. Details like these should never be known to anyone outside the bank, except guards or employees. At this point, investigators reconstructed what likely happened on the night of the robbery. According to their theory, the thieves entered the vault for the first time on Friday evening, between 6 and 7 p.m. This was the final hour of the workday. By then, the vault was already closed, and employees were preparing to leave, but official working hours hadn't ended yet. Most importantly, the thermal sensors were programmed to activate only after the workday officially ended, after 7 p.m. That single hour was a golden window. During that time, the thieves entered undetected and began setting everything up with precision. First, they made sure the tunnel exit was completely hidden from the cameras. Then, they mapped out the safe routes, paths through blind spots, both for cameras and thermal sensors, especially the narrow corridors between the cash containers and the vault walls. The deeper investigators went into these details, the clearer one thing became. An operation executed with this level of precision could not have been carried out without inside cooperation. And yet, despite the strong suspicions, no specific employee or guard could be directly accused. At least, not at that stage of the investigation. On the other side of the operation, on the very night of the robbery, the thieves finally reached the heart of the plan. The moment they broke through into the vault, they began emptying the cash, quietly, carefully, packing it into specially prepared bags. The break-in happened on Friday night, and that gave them a deadly advantage: an entire weekend. 2 full days to work inside the vault with no fear of being discovered, while the bank remained completely closed. The bags were moved through the tunnel in a tightly organized system. They were placed onto plastic carts, then pulled by ropes through the narrow passage until they reached the house. Each bag contained 500,000 Brazilian reais. Do the math. With a total haul of 164 million reais, the thieves needed roughly 330 bags. An absurd number. A volume that's hard to even imagine. In the middle of the operation, one of the thieves got carried away. He told the others they could break the world record for the largest robbery ever. At the time, that record belonged to a famous diamond heist in Belgium in 2003, worth about $100 million. He said, "The opportunity is right in front of us. The money's here. All we have to do is take it." But another voice cut in. Firm, serious. One of them warned the rest. "No greed. The weight is already massive. If we keep going, moving the money later might become impossible." In the end, that warning won. The truth was, they had already blown past their original goal. From the very beginning, the plan was never to steal this insane amount. Their target was around 80 million reais. What they actually took was more than double that. If they truly wanted to claim the largest heist in history by value, they would have had to push past 200 million reais. But that would have turned the cash into an unbearable burden. The weight alone would have reached absurd levels. In reality, even what they already had was terrifyingly heavy. About 3.5 tons of paper money. A massive, crushing load. And moving it, transporting it, wasn't a minor detail. It was a complex, dangerous mission on its own. One they had to finish before time ran out, and before questions started being asked. The moment the robbery was exposed, the police moved immediately. The investigation started at the closest point, the house where the tunnel emerged, and the fake company the gang had used as a front, the artificial grass business. When officials reviewed the registration records, they found the business license was issued in the name of a man called Paulo Sergio. But the real shock was the ID photo attached to the license. The photo showed the man wearing a knit cap, covering a large part of his head. For an official document, this made no sense at all. Photos like that are usually rejected. The cap made his facial features hard to identify, which raised a disturbing question. How did the Ministry of Commerce accept this photo? Was it negligence? Or did bribery play a role? The investigators didn't stop at paperwork. They went into the neighborhood and asked residents about the man who was supposedly the company owner. The neighbors described Paulo as friendly, always visible, sitting in cafes, talking to everyone. He had good relationships with the people around him and never behaved in a way that raised suspicion. That positive social image played a crucial role in keeping attention away from the gang throughout the planning and execution phases. At the same time, investigators opened a second line of inquiry. They knew one thing for sure. 3.5 tons of cash couldn't be moved on foot. Cars, maybe even trucks, had to be involved. Police began reviewing sales records from car and truck dealerships. That's when a name stood out. One dealership had sold several trucks at once, for nearly 1 million Brazilian reais. And the most important detail? The entire purchase was made in cash. The buyer was a man named José Charles. Charles already owned a transport and shipping company, so buying trucks made sense, on paper. But the way he paid didn't. Deals of that size are almost always done through bank transfers, not cash. Based on that, police opened a parallel investigation into Charles and his company. When they contacted the company, they got another surprise. The secretary told them that Charles himself had traveled that Sunday, along with one of the truck drivers. According to her, the trip was an urgent delivery mission to the city of São Paulo. The moment investigators heard São Paulo, their suspicions intensified. Yes, São Paulo is nearly 3,000 kilometers from Fortaleza, where the robbery took place. But this wasn't a random detail. In 2004, a major robbery had occurred in São Paulo using the exact same method, digging an underground tunnel to reach a bank. From the start of the investigation, police believed the people behind that heist were directly connected to the central bank robbery. There may have even been shared members between the two gangs. Now, knowing that the owner of a transport company had personally traveled to São Paulo with a truck driver, the picture became much clearer. The most likely scenario was obvious. He was moving the stolen money, or at least part of it. And the question that made everything darker was both simple and dangerous. Why would the owner of a transport company personally accompany a driver on a routine delivery? That single detail was enough to place José Charles directly in the line of suspicion and push the investigation into a far more sensitive and dangerous phase. As the investigation moved forward, police managed to locate the suspected truck. It was a car carrier truck. On the surface, everything looked normal. It was loaded with vehicles and traveling the long route from Fortaleza to São Paulo, a journey of more than 3,000 kilometers, meaning several days on the road. Confirmed intelligence reached the federal police. The truck was currently in Belo Horizonte, a city located along that exact route. Immediately, a federal police team was dispatched by helicopter toward the city. But as the helicopter was landing, the team leader received an urgent call from local police. The news was unexpected. The truck had stopped on its own at a highway police checkpoint before any patrol had intercepted it. And the reason for that stop was the driver himself. The driver had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. He wasn't part of the operation. Over the weekend, he had received a call from his manager telling him there was an extremely urgent car shipment that had to be transported immediately. He was forced to cut his vacation short and return to work, even though car transport is almost never urgent. Things became even stranger when he was told that José Charles, the owner of the company, would personally accompany him on the trip. This had never happened before. During the drive, suspicious behavior began to pile up. Charles repeatedly asked to stop at roadside stations. Every time he got out and used public payphones to make calls, even though he clearly had a personal cell phone. That alone made the driver uneasy. Then came the moment that changed everything. At one of those stops, while Charles was busy on a phone call, the driver took a quick look at the cars loaded on the truck. The vehicles were locked, but through one of the windows, he noticed something completely unexpected. Bundles of cash scattered across the floor of one of the cars. In that instant, everything clicked. He immediately connected what he'd seen to the central bank robbery that was dominating TV screens and news headlines everywhere. He didn't hesitate. The driver made his decision on the spot and drove straight to the nearest highway police post to report what he had seen. Police had already been alerted about the truck, so they received it with weapons drawn. Shortly after, federal police units arrived at the scene. Both the driver and José Charles were arrested and taken in for questioning. When police searched the cars on the truck, they found nearly 6 million Brazilian reais hidden inside. It was nothing compared to the total stolen amount, 164 million reais, but it was still a massive sum on its own. During interrogation, even darker details emerged. Charles had a brother named Marco Ribeiro, a man previously suspected of being a major drug trafficker in São Paulo. Investigators also confirmed that Charles hadn't taken part in the robbery itself. He wasn't one of the men who dug the tunnel or entered the vault. He was a behind-the-scenes partner, responsible for transportation, trucks, and logistical coordination. Charles admitted that he didn't know the identities of most of the people involved. According to him, the agreement was simple. Everyone would take their share and disappear on their own. As for him, he was only transporting his share and his brother's share, the 6 million reais found inside the cars. But that confession wasn't the end of the trail. It was only the beginning. What police had recovered was just a tiny fraction of a mountain of money that had vanished, and the search for the rest was about to drag investigators into paths far darker and far more dangerous. Charles chose to cooperate with the police. He decided to talk and reveal everything he knew. During interrogation, he confirmed that the number of people involved was around 34 individuals. That alone made one thing clear. This wasn't a small crew. It was a large, carefully organized criminal network. But then came the surprise. Charles explained that he didn't actually know who most of them were. The only person he was directly connected to was his brother, Marco. The rest? No names, no backgrounds. In many cases, he had only seen their faces briefly. Marco was the middleman, the coordinator, the bridge connecting everyone. Based on that, investigators showed Charles a series of photographs, known criminals who were already under suspicion. They asked him one simple question: "Have you seen any of these people before?" During that lineup, Charles identified several faces, confirming he had seen them among the members of the gang. That's when the picture started coming together. There was Charles himself, already under arrest. There was his brother, Marco Ribeiro, a well-known criminal mind in São Paulo. There was Paulo, the man with the knit cap, the fake identity used to register the house and the company. And then, another dangerous name surfaced: Elimão. Elimão was a known criminal in Fortaleza, with a long record of major robberies. He wasn't just another thief. He was a frequent partner of Marco in previous operations. Because of that, police believed early on that Elimão was actually one of the leaders of the operation, if not one of the main decision-makers. But the most dangerous name of all was a single one: Moisés. Moisés's story alone was enough to raise serious concern. This man had been convicted and imprisoned. But in 2001, he took part in one of the boldest prison escapes in Brazilian history. He was being held at Carandiru prison when he helped execute a massive group escape, 53 inmates breaking out at once. How did they do it? Through an underground tunnel. From that moment on, Moisés became known as a tunnel expert. A few years later, in 2004, his name surfaced again in the São Paulo bank robbery. The very same robbery investigators had already noticed shared striking similarities with the central bank heist. Moisés wasn't just involved there. He was one of the coordinators, one of the key links between both crimes. As the pieces came together, the truth became impossible to ignore. Moisés was the one who assembled the new crew for the central bank robbery. He selected most of the members. He coordinated them, step by step. The police didn't have this full picture from the start. But from the earliest moments of the investigation, Moisés had been high on the suspect list. Now, with Charles's testimony, the fragments began to lock into place. A network of suspects started forming clearly right in front of the investigators' eyes. This was no longer just a massive robbery. It was a complex criminal syndicate, run by seasoned professionals, each with a long history in crime. And right here, the police were preparing for the next move, a move that would uncover something even darker and push this case into territory far more insane than anyone could have imagined. At this stage, the police finally had something solid, a clear list of suspects, backed by real evidence and multiple leads. But the most important question was still hanging in the air. Do they move now and start making arrests? The answer was no. Moving too fast would have ruined one of the main goals of the investigation, recovering as much of the stolen money as possible. Under Brazilian law at the time, robbery sentences were relatively light. If a thief got arrested early, he might serve a few years, walk out of prison, and find his fortune waiting for him. The police didn't just want the thieves, they wanted the money. One of the most valuable clues came from inside the house used as the tunnel's starting point. The place was a disaster. Trash everywhere, tools, leftover materials, total chaos. And right there, buried among the mess, an officer found something that looked insignificant. A prepaid phone recharge card. That card turned out to be pure gold. Using the serial number, investigators traced it to a specific phone number. They contacted the telecom company, got the line details, and immediately started monitoring the calls. The number belonged to a man named Antonio Adamar. The name rang a bell. He already had a criminal record. Police didn't know his exact address, but they did know the area where he lived. Boa Viagem. A special federal police unit was assigned to Antonio. They began discreet surveillance, tracking his movements, slowly tightening the circle without tipping him off. Then they intercepted a call, and this one was different. Antonio was asking a woman to go out and buy a large quantity of rubber bands. In the world of money, rubber bands have only one real purpose: bundling cash. At that moment, the suspicion became certainty. The money was there, and they were getting ready to count it, divide it, and package it. At the same time, field agents managed to pinpoint Antonio's exact location. He was inside a red house, still in the same neighborhood. Surveillance began immediately. The officers were in plain clothes. Nothing about them stood out. Across the street from the house was a small cafe. They sat inside, pretending to sip coffee and tea, while never taking their eyes off the front door. After a while, two men walked out of the house. One of them suddenly stopped and stared straight at the officers. Long, suspicious looks, the kind that says something's not right. The team knew it instantly. Their cover was about to be blown. There was no more time to wait. They moved in, weapons drawn, badges out. They identified themselves and ordered both men to get on the ground. Within minutes, backup units arrived. The house was surrounded, and then stormed. Inside, reality matched the police's expectations, and then exceeded them. Massive amounts of cash were everywhere. Bundles stacked against the walls, others stuffed inside bags and suitcases, and right in the middle of the house, a hole in the ground, filled with sacks of money. When the cash was counted, the total exceeded 12 million Brazilian reals, a significant chunk of the stolen fortune, clearly belonging to multiple people. Everyone inside the house was arrested. At the top of the list was Antonio Adamar, the primary surveillance target. Another arrest stood out immediately, a man known as Old David. David was no small player. He was Antonio's boss, and one of the actual participants in the bank heist itself. He was in charge of dividing the money, distributing the shares, and recording everything carefully in a personal notebook. These two were the main targets, Antonio and Old David. But they weren't alone. 3 other individuals were arrested inside the house. They hadn't taken part in digging the tunnel or entering the vault, but they worked for David, helping hide and manage the cash. Once interrogations began, new threads started to surface, new names, new locations, and more missing money. The case began to explode in size. Every lead became a separate file. Every file was assigned to its own team of investigators. A wave of coordinated raids and arrests started forming, quietly, methodically, in the background. There were many details still to uncover, but what was coming next was darker, bolder, and some of the operations ahead were absolutely insane. One of the key members of the gang arrested by the police was a man named Desi Mar. During his interrogation, he dropped a bombshell. He admitted to bribing a bank guard, and the guard wasn't just some random person. It was his close personal friend. The guard's name was Idelson. Through this bribe, the thieves gained full access to the bank's security systems. Idelson provided them with every detail they needed. The locations of surveillance cameras, the positions of heat sensors, the alarm systems, even the crane, and the narrow pathways between the walls and the money vaults. All the details we talked about at the beginning of the story. They weren't just lucky guesses. They were insider information. And that's when the investigators' suspicions were confirmed. This wasn't just a random heist. The gang had inside help. But that wasn't all. Next up, there was another suspect emerging, one just as dangerous. During the investigation, the police came across a new name, Raimundo Lirendo. Tracking him down wasn't easy. The story's long, but here's the short version. The police traced his calls to his girlfriend. Raimundo was extremely cautious. He never used his personal phone. He only made calls from public payphones. But the mistake he made, his girlfriend wasn't as careful. By tapping into her calls, the police were able to pinpoint Raimundo's location. They started tracking him for months, certain that he was a member of the gang. This was about 10 months after the central bank heist. One day, Raimundo traveled to a coastal city called Porto Alegre. The moment he landed at the airport, the federal police were already on his tail. He met up with a man named Alessandro, who was known as the Fat Guy. They left the airport together, got into a car, and headed straight for a house. The police followed them closely, setting up surveillance on the house. Shortly after, 3 other men arrived and entered the house. As time passed, more people showed up. One by one, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time. The officers counted. There were 11 people inside the house. They all arrived at different times. The message was clear. Something was being planned here. Later on, the police watched as the Fat Guy left the house. He went to a bus station where a group of people was waiting for him. They all got into his pickup truck, which was loaded with equipment. Alessandro drove them to the city center, stopping in front of an old building. Everyone got out, unloading the truck full of supplies. The investigation uncovered a startling new detail. The building had been purchased. The official owner was one of them, a man named Fabrizio. He bought it for 1.5 million reais. And here's the big question the investigators were asking. What would criminals like these want with an old, dilapidated building? Why were they hauling equipment into it? The answer became pretty clear right away. The police immediately realized they were digging a new tunnel. A quick look at the area revealed something even more dangerous. Just a short distance from the building, there was a major bank called Bannersul, and beneath that bank, there were massive underground vaults. This was their next target. The gang preparing for this new operation wasn't the same group that pulled off the central bank heist, but there were shared members between the two gangs. Tracking down those shared members led the police to this new network. And this is what happens all the time in the world of crime. People with rare expertise, like tunnel digging and bank heists, bounce from one gang to another, selling their experience for each new job, with different faces, different goals, but the same madness. At that stage, the police still didn't have hard proof of what was actually happening inside the building. And without solid evidence, they couldn't just storm in. They needed something smarter, silent, invisible. So the federal police made a calculated move. They rented a building directly across the street from the one the thieves were using. From there, they installed high-grade surveillance cameras, listening devices, and live monitoring screens, covering the target building from multiple angles. From that moment on, the watch began. The thieves were careful, very careful. They played their roles perfectly, pretending to be nothing more than renovation workers. They wore official work uniforms, hard hats. They moved in and out like a normal construction crew restoring an old building. But the police noticed something important. Large amounts of trash were being removed almost every single day. The head of the surveillance unit picked up on it immediately and told his team, "Watch the trash. The trash will tell us how far they've gone." Then he broke it down. If the trash is broken tiles and debris, they're still at the surface. If you start seeing dirt and sand, they've begun digging underground. If concrete and steel show up, that means they've reached the level of the bank's vault. The plan was clear. Constant surveillance. Zero mistakes. Move in only when they were close enough to the vault, with undeniable proof. But then, something unexpected happened. While monitoring phone calls, the police discovered that some members of the gang were being threatened and blackmailed by a third party. This third party knew exactly what was going on inside the building, and they were demanding money in exchange for staying quiet. The police grew concerned. Whoever this was, they could blow the entire operation wide open. But what the investigators didn't expect was who that third party actually was. The shock was unreal. It wasn't one person, it was two. And worse than that, they were police officers, corrupt cops. The federal police watched with their own eyes as the two officers entered the building, spoke directly with the thieves, and demanded bribes in exchange for looking the other way. It was the kind of twist that, if you saw it in a movie, you'd say it was over the top. At that moment, the federal police knew the entire operation was in danger. Corrupt cops in the middle of it meant any delay could leak everything, so the decision was made. Move in, immediately. Two snipers were positioned on the rooftop of the building across the street, just in case. Meanwhile, the tactical teams surrounded the building from all sides. Then, they breached the front door. Inside, there was no resistance. The thieves weren't armed. They surrendered instantly. Within minutes, special forces had full control of the building. The result? 26 people arrested at once. And yes, they found the hole. The tunnel was hidden beneath a wooden panel. Inside, it was reinforced with wooden beams and steel supports. Experts examined it and confirmed something chilling. This tunnel was dug using the exact same professional method as the one used in the central bank heist. But the biggest shock? The gang had already dug 78 meters. They were only 12 meters away from the bank's vault. 12 meters, and out of everyone arrested that day, only 2 were confirmed to be members of the original central bank gang, Raimundo Lirendo and Alessandro, known as the Fat Guy. And right there, all the threads of this case began pulling tighter and tighter together. We're now in 2007. 2 full years had passed since the central bank heist, and yet, some of the suspects were still out there. The investigation never really stopped. It just became routine. Phone taps, watching relatives, Following wives, girlfriends, friends. Same methods, same pressure. I won't drag you through the boring parts. What matters now are the arrests, because some of them were strange, some intense, and some downright shocking. One of the men arrested in 2007 was Jose Marludo. At first, the police didn't recognize him. He had grown a beard, changed his entire look, basically erased the man he used to be. But the mistake that took him down? His wife. The police recognized her immediately. And once they did, they knew the man standing next to her was their guy. The officers were in plain clothes. One of them walked up quietly, leaned in close, and whispered in his ear, "Federal police. It's over." What happened next? He collapsed instantly, passed out on the spot, didn't even get a word out. When he woke up, he was already in handcuffs. And here's the strange part. He didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't run. He actually looked at them and said, "Take me to prison. It's better than this." Even though he was a millionaire, he said those 2 years on the run were the worst of his life. Constant fear, endless paranoia, sleeping without peace. He told police he wanted to leave his criminal past behind and start over. The police didn't care about promises. They cared about one thing: the money. They told him to show them everything he had, and he did. He led them to a hidden spot, dug into the ground, and pulled out 2 buried containers. The first one, a barrel filled with cash. The second one, a barrel packed with property deeds. Houses, land, assets bought with his share of the robbery. The police seized everything. The cash, the properties, the assets. They left him with nothing. Later, the lead investigator said, "If there's one person we're sure ended up poorer than he was before the robbery, it's this man. We took absolutely everything." That same year, 2007, another arrest shook the case even harder. Elimo. The man police believed was one of the leaders, maybe even the original mastermind behind the heist. Elimo did everything he could to disappear. He grew his hair, grew a beard, completely changed his appearance. Fake identities, different lives. One day a salesman, another day a farmer, another day a simple laborer. The police were chasing him, but they weren't sure what he really looked like anymore, until one fatal mistake. A tattoo, an old tattoo on his right arm, something he could never fully hide. That tattoo exposed him. Once they confirmed it, he was arrested, and the charges were made official. Just like the others, everything was taken. Money, properties, assets, all of it. But even after all these arrests, the story still wasn't over. Because for some members of this crew, their punishment wasn't prison. Their fate was worse. Much worse. Stranger, darker, and more brutal than you can imagine. And the next part? That's where you realize this robbery was never a blessing. It was a curse. Now we move on to the next suspect. And with this chapter, we officially enter early 2008. This is where a very important name comes back into the story. Paolo. The man who appeared in the Ministry of Commerce documents wearing a wool hat. The man the house was officially registered under. On paper, his name was Paolo Sergio. But that name? It wasn't real. After a long and careful investigation, police discovered his true identity was completely different. And after months of tracking, they finally located him. Paolo was spotted outside a car rental company. He walked out like it was just another normal day, when men in plain clothes approached him. They spoke calmly. "Police, you're under arrest." What happened next shocked everyone. Paulo didn't believe them. Even when they showed their official badges, he started screaming at the top of his lungs, "They're kidnapping me! They're kidnapping me!" The officers tried to calm him down. They repeated over and over that they were federal police and that this was a lawful arrest. But Paulo fought back. Hard. The situation turned violent, and it took serious effort to force him into the car. Eventually, he gave up, and only then did it sink in. These weren't kidnappers. They really were the police. At the police station, the interrogation began. The first question was simple, but unsettling. How did you get an official ID photo while wearing a wool hat? A photo like that is never approved. Paulo answered without hesitation. I forged it. He said it calmly, added that it cost him a lot of money. But in the end, the forgery worked. Then they asked him the obvious follow-up. Why did you react so violently when we arrested you? That's when the real horror came out. Paulo looked at them and said, because I've been kidnapped twice before, and both times, the kidnappers claimed they were police. He explained that he had been forced to pay massive ransoms to be released, and during one of those kidnappings, he was shot. At that moment, everything clicked. The central bank robbers weren't just being hunted by police. They had become prey for every organized crime group around them. Everyone knew the truth. There was unprotected money out there, millions in cash, and everyone wanted a piece. Kidnappings, extortion, threats, murder, it all became part of their daily lives, and the pattern repeats. Remember Marliudo? The man who later admitted he spent a year and a half hiding in the jungle. His fear wasn't just the police. It was criminals like himself, hunting him down for his share of the money, the stolen cash. Instead of giving them power, turned their lives into an open hell. And with every new suspect, one truth becomes clearer. The central bank robbery wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the curse. And what's coming next? We'll show how some of them ended up in ways no one could have imagined. Now we move on to another suspect, a name we've heard before, a name the police had placed right at the center of the circle. Moises, the man who once escaped prison with 53 other inmates through an underground tunnel. The tunnel expert. The same man who took part in the São Paulo bank robbery before the central bank heist ever happened. Almost every suspect who was arrested agreed on one thing. Moises recruited them. He brought most of the crew together. He coordinated everything. That made him one of the main leaders of the operation. And because of that, the police focus on him was relentless. Moises was smart. He knew how to disappear. He stayed on the run for years. Police couldn't get to him until 2009, 4 full years after the central bank robbery. The thread that finally led them to him. His wife. Police began monitoring her, wiretapping her calls, tracking her movements. They noticed a pattern. Some weekends, she would take their son to visit his father, Moises. Little by little, that trail led them to an apartment building in São Paulo. Police identified Moises's car and watched the building until they were sure the car was parked in the underground garage. They didn't want a loud raid, no chase, no risk of escape. So they set a trap. They asked the building's security guard to call Moises and tell him that another resident had accidentally hit his car while leaving the garage and wanted to talk. Moises didn't suspect a thing. He left his apartment, walked down the hallway, got into the elevator, pressed the button to go down. Security cameras captured every second. When the elevator doors opened in the garage, he froze. Standing right in front of him were multiple federal police officers. He stared at them, Stunned, they spoke calmly. "Federal police, you're under arrest." At that moment, one of the biggest minds behind the central bank robbery was finally caught. Moises looked at them and said bitterly, "I thought you forgot about me." 4 years. The operation commander replied quietly, "Don't worry. We never forgot you. Not for a second." Police officially classified Moises as one of three main leaders of the operation. The second was Elimao, already arrested after changing his appearance and hiding under false identities. But the third was the most dangerous name of all, Fernandinho, a well-known criminal in São Paulo, a seasoned gangster, one of the city's biggest drug traffickers. But more importantly, he was the main financier of the central bank robbery. This operation wasn't simple. It required renting a house, registering a fake company, digging equipment, food and supplies for dozens of people, cars, trucks, fuel, monthly expenses for months on end. All of that required serious money up front. That's where Fernandinho came in. According to police, he funded the operation with 3 million Brazilian reais. In return, he received the largest cut of the stolen money, 15% of the total. Since the gang stole 164 million reais, Fernandinho's share was close to 25 million reais. But one question remained unanswered. Where did Fernandinho go? Did he actually get away? Or did the curse catch up with him, just like it did with the others? In the world of organized crime, sudden money doesn't mean safety. It means a target painted on your back. And what happened to Fernandinho was the cruelest proof of that. Fernandinho, drug lord, main financier of the central bank robbery, a man with power, money, and fear attached to his name, was kidnapped. The men who took him were wearing police uniforms. At first, no one knew the truth. Were they criminals in disguise? Or were they corrupt cops? But one thing was clear. They demanded a ransom worth millions of reais. The family paid. They paid everything. But Fernandinho never came back. Sometime later, police found his body. He was dead, despite his fortune, despite his influence, despite a name that once terrified people. Later investigations uncovered the most disturbing truth of all. The kidnappers were corrupt police officers. And not only that, they already knew Fernandinho personally. They knew exactly who he was. And they knew one thing for sure. If Fernandinho got out alive, he would hunt them down. Fernandinho wasn't a small-time criminal. He was upper tier, and revenge for him was only a matter of time. So they made a decision. They killed him. And to make sure no one could ever identify them, they killed others connected to him, people who might recognize their faces later. They erased everything, as if the man had never existed. This wasn't a street gang. These were police officers. In that city, even the police could be part of the crime. Fernandinho wasn't the only one. Many members of the gang were kidnapped, extorted, robbed, by criminals, by corrupt police, by anyone who believed they had access to stolen millions. The curse was coming from every direction. That's why some of them actually felt relief when they were officially arrested. One of those men was someone named Pedro. He was at home, a quiet life on the surface, until the knock on the door. He opened it and saw a group of men. He asked, "Yes?" They answered calmly, "Police officers." They told him to hand over the money he stole from the central bank. They didn't wait for a reply. They stormed the house, beat him, assaulted his wife, and took everything they could find. More than 1 million reais vanished in minutes. Once again, corrupt police robbing a thief. But it didn't stop there. Some time later, another group showed up. Same threat, same violence, same search. Pedro screamed at them, "There's nothing left. Another group already robbed me." They didn't believe him. They beat him again, searched the house again, and when they found nothing, they left. At that moment, Pedro understood the truth. This would never end. Today, a gang. Tomorrow, corrupt cops. Next week, someone else. A lifetime of fear, waiting, paranoia. So he did something unbelievable. He walked into a police station and turned himself in. He said it clearly. "I can't live like this. Prison is better. At least everyone knows I don't have anything anymore." A strange situation, but it sums up the entire story. The central bank robbery didn't give anyone a new life. It created a curse that followed its owners to death, to prison, or to madness. And there was another case, just as horrifying, if not worse. The suspect was Anselmo, one of the men involved in the central bank robbery. Police finally found him inside a house, but not alive. They found his body, along with two of his associates. Their hands were tied. Clear strangulation marks were wrapped around their necks. And the shock? The suspects in this murder, corrupt police officers. The number of corrupt cops arrested because of this single case was terrifying. So high, in fact, that it nearly matched the number of criminals themselves. These weren't just a few bad apples. They had full access, identities, addresses, phone numbers, movements, and they used that information to hunt the suspects one by one. In one unbelievable moment, the federal police were wiretapping a call from one of the suspects. Suddenly, they heard talk about a kidnapping, a video, ransom negotiations. From the details alone, they knew the truth. Once again, the kidnappers were corrupt police officers, but the real shock was still coming. When they traced the phone number, they discovered the call was coming from inside the same police station where the federal police were operating. Yes, the same building, federal police listening in, while corrupt officers from inside the station itself were calling criminals and negotiating ransom money. It was unreal. The federal police walked straight over and arrested them inside the police station. No one knows if something like this had ever happened before in history, but it was so insane that if it appeared in a movie, people would say it was exaggerated. The central bank robbery in Brazil wasn't just a massive theft, it was an earthquake. Its impact spread into dozens of criminal cases, kidnappings, extortion, murders, and worse than that, it inspired other gangs. Bank robberies through tunnels became a criminal trend. Every year, police began discovering dozens of tunnels. Some operations were stopped at the very last moment. Others weren't stopped at all. One of the operations that was stopped had a target of 1 billion Brazilian reals. If it had succeeded, it would have been the biggest bank robbery in history. The gang rented a house about 500 meters away from the bank to avoid suspicion. Their plan? Dig a tunnel half a kilometer long, the longest tunnel ever attempted in this kind of operation. The target was Banco do Brasil, and this bank wasn't ordinary. It's the main cash distribution hub for other banks across the country. Under it were 5 massive vaults. Each vault always held at least 1 billion reais. The thieves worked silently. They dug an enormous distance. They actually reached beneath the bank itself. But then, the bank's floor started to crack. The reason? The contractor who built the building hadn't met proper quality standards. The secret was exposed. And the cruel irony? They had reached directly beneath the vault. All that was left was to break through the final opening. Centimeters, just centimeters, stood between them and 1 billion rays. But the story ended before it ever truly began. All right, before we wrap this up, let's take a final, clear look at how this case ended. The federal police succeeded in fully solving the case. No loose ends, no missing pieces, no unanswered questions. The entire criminal network was exposed, and most members of the gang were identified and dealt with. Some were killed, some were arrested, some had their fates traced in full detail. Only one man remains a mystery to this day. His name was Jovenel. He's the only one who truly got away, vanished completely, and was never found. Out of the 164 million Brazilian reais stolen from the central bank, police managed to recover about 34 million reais, a small percentage, but that was all they could get. Why? Because the thieves laundered huge portions of the money. They bought real estate, land, properties, assets, often at undervalued prices to clean the cash. Another large chunk of the money was burned away in ransoms, bribes, gang wars, kidnappings. Simply put, millions just disappeared. If the suspects had been charged with theft alone, many of them would have faced relatively short prison sentences. Why? Because theft penalties in Brazil are surprisingly lenient. But what changed everything was money laundering. Those charges were far more serious. Every house they bought, every car, every device, every bank account, each one was treated as a separate crime. Cases stacked, sentences piled up. Some defendants ended up with over 100 years in prison. In other words, a life sentence, in everything but name. This is where our story comes to a close. I genuinely hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Those small actions really help the channel grow and motivate me to keep bringing you stories like this one. And if you're in the mood for more intense stories, right now on your screen, you'll find the North Hollywood bank robbery, one of the most explosive, action-packed robberies ever. And one of the biggest bank heists in British history. Pure intelligence, careful planning, and non-stop suspense from start to finish. Both stories are absolutely worth your time. I'll see you in the next story. Take care.